Welcome, everybody. It's a great pleasure to have the online audience with us. Welcome to Kunsthaus Hamburg. It's a great pleasure to have Ilana Harris-Babou here today. With her, Greg the Cuir, who's going to do the conversation with Ilana. In the context of her solo show at Kunsthaus Hamburg that we opened already 2 weeks ago. We had the pleasure here in Hamburg to have Ilana personally for the installation and the opening. But it's also very nice that we have the chance and that you both took your time to do this conversation here tonight, also for an online audience, so we can have also people from outside of Hamburg joining this conversation, and through this conversation also get a little bit of a glimpse into our exhibition space, and of course, most important, get introduced to the work of Ilana Harris-Babou. She's based in New York, where she's right now, and she has been exhibited through the US and Europe, and holds an MFA in Visual Arts from the Columbia University and a BA in Art from Yale University. Parallel to her solo show at Kunsthaus Hamburg, she presents her works at the Institute of Contemporary Art at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. And I'm not sure, but maybe Rachel Reese, the director and curator of the ICA in Tennessee, is also joining us tonight. Together with her, we commissioned, and also in the context of the show in Tennessee with the title Tasteful Interiors, we commissioned a text on Ilana's work by Dessain Lopez Cassel, which is available online on both websites. When you go on the website of Kunsthaus Hamburg, you will find the visitor brochure, and in there you will find the text by Dessain. Recent solo shows of Ilana Harris-Babou were on display at Jacob Lawrence Gallery in Seattle, the Museum of Arts and Design, and at Gallery Hesse-Flatto in New York, to only mention a few. Other institutions presented her work in group exhibitions, amongst others, CCA Waters Institute San Francisco, Queen's Museum in New York, Istanbul Design Biennial, Turkey, Kunsthalle Charlottenburg in Copenhagen, Denmark, Whitney Biennial in 2019, Jewish Museum Sculpture Center, and those all in New York. Greg the Cuir is an independent curator, writer, and translator who lives and works in Belgrade, Serbia, from where, if I got it right, he's joining us today. It's here, and for Greg it's tonight, but for Ilana it's today. And Greg received his PhD from the Faculty of Dramatic Arts at the University of Arts in Belgrade, and did his MA from the School of Cinematic Arts at the University of Southern California in LA. His long-running screen series Avant Noir, which presents contemporary film and video work by artists concerned with visual representation of Black culture, was first shown in 2014 at Institute of Contemporary Arts in London, and has since traveled through Europe and North America. These programs have been shown at Festival Alternative Film Video in Belgrade, Black Star Film Festival in Philadelphia, and the Slovenian Kinoteca in Ljubljana. And the Cuir works as a selector for Kurzfilmtage Oberhausen and as a lecturer at Johannes Gutenberg Universität in Mainz here in Germany. So herzlich willkommen, Greg.
Vielen Dank.
I hope the audience can hear us well. If you have questions, please feel free to use the chat, and I will switch off my screen and hand over the mic to Ilana and Greg. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Ilana, thank you for sharing a stage with me. Congratulations on your show. I'm really excited to be here and to discuss your work, this exhibition in specific, your work in general. This will be sort of an improvised sort of flowing discussion. So maybe we can even talk a little bit about your background and how we got from point A to point B, being here sort of virtually, somehow, some way connected to Hamburg. So yeah, thank you so much for being here with me.
Yes, thank you so much, Greg, and thank you for that wonderful introduction, Katja. It's been like such a dream and an honor to be able to do this, and especially nowadays, like I mentioned to you all before, to be able to travel at all and to see my work with different audiences, or to be able to even really talk about the work outside of an American context, because that is so often, you know, that's where I'm from, that's the audience that I normally have. And in a lot of ways, I think about my work sort of dealing with these sort of these deceptions or lies or promises of the American dream, you know, that I think I look a lot at sort of like aspirational media. So like home improvement TV or cooking shows or beauty demos. And so so work from the past, I guess, 5 years has made its way into this show, including a new work that I made specifically for Hamburg.
Yeah, so just to reiterate about this particular exhibition in this particular space, this is your first solo show in Europe, if I'm not mistaken. I believe that would be accurate based on the notes from the exhibition. So congratulations on that also. It's a wonderful institution, wonderful space for your first European show. I don't know, maybe we can start our discussion there. What does that sort of feel like in terms of bringing your work to this space? And as you mentioned when we discussed before the show started, being at the opening and sort of discussing your work with new audiences, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how that felt and what that was like.
Yeah, I think like I was just, the whole kind of affair, I think, was a big surprise for me. It is my first solo exhibition in Europe. And to be able to have a show like that where I'm exploring sort of past work and current work at the same time. At first, my real question was, have I made enough work? I'm 30 myself. And so I really only have been making work that feels like it's mine, if that makes sense, for the past maybe 5 years or so. 5 or 6 years. And so being able to see it all come together for this completely new audience in this different way was really exciting. I could go ahead and I could share some pictures of how everything is installed together, if that seems good.
Yeah, please do. We can use that to spark some more discussion. So feel free to share whatever you like. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's kind of what you see when you walk into the space. And it's kind of a revisiting an installation I did called Decision Fatigue in 2020. And this piece I made, I was looking at like a lot of like beauty tutorials online. I had been going to I was doing this artist residency back in like 2019 in the Hamptons, that like kind of really wealthy part of, you know, Long Island vacation community in New York State. And I had been going into all of these like wellness and beauty stores and seeing this magazine that really kind of caught my eye that was called Purist and Adventure and Wellness. And it was like, they would have these phrases like clean eating and pure pics. And so I imagined I would make my own kind of beauty space that had kind of unclean products like Cheeto face serum or like car air freshener soap. And so I kind of put them all together in this space, this time along with some kind of sort of plants that we actually bought on the scene in Hamburg, these sort of house plants that often I would notice would look like sort of body parts or like sort of lots of vulvic forms. So a big bright pink here. But I could just walk us through like each of the spaces. So when you come in, this is what you see first. And so like, for those of you who haven't been to Kunsthaus Hamburg, it is like really big. So it struck me at first. I was like, how am I going to split it up? But so then on this wall, I had the collages that I made out of that magazine that I mentioned to you all called Purist. And so here are some of them kind of closer up. So lots of crystals and all these sort of promises of prevention, like this, you could buy this $20,000 coil that you could sit on your lap and it would sense the vibrations of your voice and tell you if you had Lyme disease or not, and then send out waves that would like take it out of your body. And so we kind of framed these and put these collages on the wall. In this area is the new work that I made for the show that I actually began right when the initial installation of Decision Fatigue came down in New York City. It came down in March of 2020. And so all the plants in that version of the installation got kind of locked in there and, you know, didn't get watered and died. But obviously the ways I was thinking about wellness and what it means to be well and healthy changed a lot. And so this work is, you can see here a close-up of like the wallpaper that these monitors sit on, is thinking about wellness guru, Dr. Sebi, because I wanted to start to, if like people like Goop or Gwyneth Paltrow are these sort of like idealized version of whiteness and health, I wanted to start to look to other models of health. And so Dr. Sebi's like kind of Black nationalist diet stuck with me. And then this, when you walk into this room, it's a piece called Finishing a Raw Basement that I actually made in 2017. And on the wall, you have these sculptures that are a pegboard with these sort of ceramic hammers and tools that I call dysfunctional ceramics. And in this space, you have a piece that I made in 2019 called Human Design that was partly shot inside of Restoration Hardware, which is like a high-end furniture store in New York City, and Senegal, where my father is from. And there are some collages on the wall there made out of catalogs from Restoration Hardware, which they call their source books, which are these big, giant tomes. So that kind of gives you an idea of the layout of the whole space and the different bodies of work that are in there.
Thank you for the brief walkthrough, sort of this virtual tour. So the title of your exhibition is Wholesome Fun. I wanted to ask you about that, but also to ask in general, because what doesn't come through so much in the pictures is your use of humor and comedy. You get the sense looking at your work that the unexpected and the comedic and the satirical and even sort of physical comedy in some cases makes an appearance in your work. So talk about maybe wholesome fun and also the way that you use humor.
Yeah, I think for me, humor is like very much a way to sort of digest more painful realities. It's like the sugary coating on the outside of the Tylenol tablet or the medicine tablet that lets you kind of take down the more bitter thing you really need. I think also sometimes I just kind of can't help but go there. Like there's certain parts of your process that you just sort of lift towards always. And so when I'm shooting my videos, in which I often sort of mimic a familiar form, like say a home improvement show, I often begin by in earnest trying to mimic that, like trying to say the things that the host is saying. But because I'm me and I'm not in the body of that host and I'm human, I inevitably fail. And I sort of lay those failures bare in the editing process. And I think that's where a lot of the humor is generated as well. I think that for me, video is sort of like this emissary out of the studio. So I don't really go into my videos with a clear plan. I don't make a storyboard. I just start experimenting with like physical materials in the studio with a camera like kind of trained on it for hours and hours. And then kind of like my collages, I then sort of take those bits and put them together on the timeline and see whatever could resemble a narrative, like how that could come together by sort of pressing these two things up against one another, these different moments.
Yeah, and speaking of materials, I'm also glad that you brought that up, because that's something else I wanted to discuss with you. So in looking at your work, it seems obvious that the other major concern of yours is, I guess we could say, craft objects, sort of the act of making objects, but also, you know, there's different words that appear in your videos, like design and raw basements. So this this very sort of, yeah, this sort of craftsmanship or craftswomanship or craft work, or whatever term we would like to place on it. But also what's interesting is the fallibility of this craft. Like one of my favorite moments in your videos is, you know, when, you know, you're hammering things, but like the hammer fails, or the hammer sort of collapses. So maybe we can talk a little bit about craft, and also, as you mentioned, how you craft your videos, not just objects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about maybe like these different spaces of creation. So coming into video from, like I sort of started making videos when my identity was still like a painter. And I realized that there was only one moment in the life of a painting I was excited about. And that was when it was still wet and messy, and when it was still in a state of becoming. And the final product felt more like an artifact of what was really exciting to me about that process. And so I thought, like, why don't I just train the camera on those moments and share those moments with people directly, when the thing is still being made. And I started to think about how are these different spaces of creation like similar to or different from one another. So how is the artist studio and maybe the fantasies we have about a genius flinging around paint between white walls similar to or different from like the sound stage where the cooking show hostess is, and or the man cave fantasy we have about someone crafting their perfect like sort of workbench chair in their basement, or how is that similar to or different from like a genius designer in a bucolic landscape finding inspiration, or that how is that like my grandma cooking pig's feet in the kitchen, you know, like which kinds of creative labor are revered and which ones are considered mundane. And so I think sometimes like in my videos, I try to kind of mix all of those things up, conflate those different ways of making, the ones that we consider useful and the ones we consider useless, the ones we consider banal and the ones we consider like almost too much, and see what happens or what questions come up when I put them side by side.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame that I couldn't be at the exhibition, because first of all, the space looks huge and beautiful, and the way that you have used that space, it's very striking. You know, even from sort of two-dimensional images from the PDFs that I have, the JPEGs that I have, I sort of have a good idea of what's in the exhibition, and one's really struck by the use of color. Just sort of, again, that, I guess, that playfulness, it's apparent very much in sort of the layout and the structure of the exhibition itself. So maybe we can also talk a little bit about crafting this exhibition, right? Working with Katja as the curator, as the artistic director there. How did that come about? What was that process like, and in terms of sort of crafting and painting this show?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was also kind of first getting the SketchUp file, which had like, you know, allowed me to plop in a little sort of being that was the size of a human inside of this, and be like, wow, that's the size of a human in that space. Like, oh my goodness. And then I think being able to talk to Katja, who knew what reality was like, right, in Kunsthaus, could help me figure out, like, when I imagined something, we had a lot of back and forth with this, like, SketchUp document I was making, like, how does that stack up with reality and what it's actually like, whether that be, you know, I think the thing that intimidated me at first was definitely, like, all the windows that seem to exist inside of Kunsthaus, like here, you know, I was thinking, like, how am I to do a video show with all these windows? But they actually have this kind of like UV film over them that makes it so that it's not quite as bright. But so then that kind of dictated a decision there, right? That the things that were closer to the windows would probably need to be on monitors. And so then that led to thinking about like sort of having these other walls that could break up the space so that there could be projected work as well, like back here. And then when building the walls, started to think about, okay, how could I break up these universes, these different older pieces by like a sort of color world or color block. Normally when I make a video, at first I'm imagining it for a very specific space, and then I know that that space will change as time goes on. So like when I first made Finishing a Raw Basement, for instance, it was for a space with red bricks, with a red brick wall. And since then I've thought about it as like existing just in this kind of red universe. Or this, then kind of using this forest green or something to hold the space too, and maybe tie the collages into the video. But it was definitely a lot of, like, one thing I was afraid of too is just like acoustics, like how could all of these videos live together sonically? And would folks have the patience to spend time with that much video too? Was one worry, but I told Katya this, which was very funny, like a couple people I talked to out here, some who are American, but some who weren't, who were like, don't worry, German people are very patient. So so they'll watch all your videos. You don't need to worry about it. Which I was like, oh, I'm curious now to go out there and see what this patient audience is like.
That's funny. Yeah. Well, I'm glad we're also talking about these videos, because I come from video art and film art, but I'm also very much interested not just in your videos but in your collages, because I see some really beautiful work that you're doing also. So I would be remiss if we didn't spend some time talking about your collages, and also we spoke a little bit about the objects that you craft, the art objects that you're making. But maybe the collages in specific. I have a soft spot in my heart for the type of collage work that you do, whether it's utilizing magazines or utilizing newspapers, sort of this wonderful visual stacking that you have to some of the collages. Maybe you can speak a little bit about that element of the exhibition and that part.
How about, okay, I'll go ahead and I'll like pull up my the PDF I have with them so I can just have it on the screen for folks. So this one, these ones here, this series, sorry, I can't get them bigger for you on the screen right now. But these are ones that I start with my collages, actually kind of, sometimes I make them before I even make the videos, and they're kind of like sketches for me, like they're a place for me to like think through thoughts. I think that for me, oftentimes I like the very first thing I'm doing is somehow like a sculpture or something, like say making a ceramic hammer and then thinking about that as like a proposition. So like a ceramic hammer would be a tool that would undo itself through its very use or something. And then to me asking myself like, okay, is the American project like a ceramic hammer of sorts? I was feeling that way. I was making the piece with the ceramic hammers and during 2016 election when I was living in the South. But then all of a sudden now I want to start to bring patterns and words in. So I'll start to turn to things like these catalogs and magazines to start to find language. And then the language will then go into like this image plane in the collage. And then from there, it might be spoken by me and then come together with other imagery in the videos. So for instance, like there are just so many kind of gems inside of this restoration hardware catalog. Like this one is for this like set of pillows that they have that are very expensive. And it says that they're woven by villagers in their homes in the west of the Atlas Mountains, and the pillows showcase the detail handiwork of indigenous Moroccan textiles. And then it'll say how it's like originally sort of created just for you. Or this collage, which I don't have as clear an image of, like really kind of was a starting point for the video I made called Human Design, because it's this $3,000 chandelier made out of these little like handmade clay beads. And they have a picture of this like blonde designer surrounded on all sides by these smiling African women. And it says, drawing on an artisan tradition, the women of rural South Africa hand roll, sun dry, and dip dye, kiln fire more than 3,000 clay beads before stringing each onto an iron frame. These one-of-a-kind chandeliers provide a life-changing source of income. And I thought that was wild, just like that. Yeah, you could buy this chandelier and you'll change these women's lives. But there's so many layers there. And I just, in general, in my work, I think I'm really interested in what happens when you take things out of context, like when you take phrases out of context, when you take images, like can some of the more nefarious underpinnings and assumptions of those things become clear once you put them all kind of next to each other on one plane. And collages really allow for me to do that.
Yeah, and also there's something really, for me at least, there's something really cinematic about the collages. There's something, you know, there's movement, the framing, in some cases the three-dimensional effects. So hopefully I'm not reading too much into it, but I also sort of see a very cinematic angle of viewing and presentation when I look at some of your collages.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so speaking about cinema, I think the other great piece in your arsenal of artistic sort of tools and techniques is your muse, who is your mother. So maybe you can talk a little bit about your mom and working with her as an actress, as a performer, as sort of one of really the key pieces in a lot of your work, one of the key elements.
Yeah, I think, you know, maybe I'll share just the first minute of finishing Raw Basement so that folks could see what it looks like when she's at my work. And then I can talk more.
Welcome back. Today, we're going to show you how to finish a raw basement, or unfinish it if you've gone too far. We'll be working in a great space, open concept, vaulted ceilings, and white to match the gallery upstairs. I brought along a friend to show us how. We're gonna have a great time. Great to see you.
It's good to be back. You know, a lot of us, we want to expose our raw bricks, but we're too shy to do it in public. I'm going to show you how to get it done in a few quick and simple steps.
Let's go down to the man cave.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so in a piece like this, I started working with my mom actually. I guess in 2016, I was in grad school, and I had always, ever since I actually made art, I always had my family in it. That was always the first thing I did. Maybe I always thought about like the piece of things that I made as like a gift or a present to a family member or something. So, you know, whether that's like when I was in high school, or I would maybe make like oil paintings out of old family photos, stuff like that. But then, you know, I like went away for school, and so didn't really have access to my family in that way to make the work. But I came back in 2016, and I was doing graduate school, so I had a studio in New York where I'm from, and so my mom could come visit my studio. And there's some of the texts and the things I was reading when I was trying to come up for, at the time I was trying to make a cooking show video. They like stood out to her, resonated with a lot of memories she had. But she, in general, like I think just a lot of my ways of making, or like relationship to frivolity perhaps, come from her, because she, for instance, she did not cook at all. She did not even attempt to cook, but we had this long, big mirror in front of the kitchen. And so she would go in there periodically and do this sort of Julia Child's routine, like for herself in front of the mirror in the kitchen, and maybe like burn some toast and then like walk away. And so she has like much more of a camera presence, I think, than I do, and like an affinity for performing in that way. So it just sort of feels natural. I think also because of the way that I make my videos, where I don't have a script, I just say a lot of things and then kind of try to tether them together. It's hard to work with an actor or even have someone else do the camera work for me, because I don't really have a plan that I want to articulate aloud to them. And so working with my mom is great, because she's like maybe the only person who has the patience for my way of working as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I couldn't help but notice when I looked at this clip that you showed, it reminded me. So, you know, thinking of television, it actually reminded me of an old TV show. It would have been before your time, I guess, Home Improvement. Your mom would have remembered it. I don't know if maybe you would have come across it, but anyway, it's a really interesting effect, sort of inserting yourself and your mother into this home improvement setting, this sort of very familiar televisual setting, which is at one time, I guess, sort of like a infomercial style, but I would also say maybe related also to sort of sitcom, the way you guys play off of each other, and sort of the inherent comedy and just sort of this telepathic sort of routine that you guys have in terms of moving back and forth in between dialogue and improvisation. But working, you know, with yourself also as a performer and your mother, we're never, I guess, too far from the surface of some sort of critique, whether that be what has been missing in the history of television or infomercials or whatever, who is allowed to sort of wield this hammer, right? Who is allowed to sort of speak with this position of authority. I love that moment when your mom turns to the camera and says, well, let's go to the man cave. So even we can talk about gender and sort of usurping those traditional roles. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that also, just whether it's gender, whether it's society, whether it's race, sort of this social critical element that's never really too far from the surface of your work.
Yeah, I think when I was making this piece in particular, I was in this like really specific headspace. I had just moved to Richmond, Virginia, and I was doing this fellowship called the Fountainhead Fellowship that's funded by this real estate company that it's named after, who are like Ayn Rand fans. And that's why it's called that. And so you stay in there, like one of their housing complexes that has art studios in it. And so like my apartment was on like the other side of the pool from my studio. And so it's still definitely the fanciest apartment I'd ever lived in. And I was super lonely and sort of sterile. And so it was also the first time I had like cable TV to myself. So I would just leave the TV playing so I could have sound in the background in my apartment. And so I was playing a lot of like HGTV and stuff, like home and garden television, like home improvement shows. And I was also thinking about like this old house, which I used to really like to watch back in the day. And I was thinking about those two characters. It'll often be like an older one and a younger one, and they'll be like specialists, and they're usually both men or something. And there's like this world of jargon that they're existing in. And so I was like thinking, I started working on this piece thinking about, like who has access to these sorts of projects, these home improvement projects. I felt very much like I wouldn't have access to even having the kind of apartment I was in if I hadn't had the cultural capital that like comes with being an artist and people giving you free stuff. But at the same time, it was like I had never lived. Richmond's like the furthest I ever lived from New York City. So crossing the Robert E. Lee Bridge to get to work every day, and then you show up at brunch and there's like Stonewall Jackson, Eggs Benedict, and all these. At the time, Monument Avenue, the big boulevard that has like each roundabout with a different Confederate general, like having a statue. That felt like that was never going anywhere when I was there. I mean, now they've taken them down, but it really didn't feel like that. So I was feeling the nefarious nature of nostalgia kind of all around me, and just the Civil War in general. And it was the election. So it was kind of that, like, I was like, oh crap, like it looks like Trump's gonna win, So obviously, like, things being unresolved or unfinished from just the story that we're in felt really raw and open to me. And so as we were saying words a lot, like I just repeat words a lot when I'm making videos, we're saying repairs to fix. like then of course, like the idea of like reparations came to my head because it felt so clear, like who doesn't have access to home ownership to do a project like this? You know, it's Black folks. I mean, at first I was thinking about finishing raw basement in actually my mom's basement, because my mom does actually have a home in Brooklyn, but it's a hard thing to imagine nowadays that a single nurse could buy a house, you know, in New York City. And so yeah, so I was like, all of these things started coming up, and that's when I started to really dive deeper into thinking about high-end furniture and nostalgia specifically. But all of those things that were kind of in my life were like coming up in the video first in ways that I couldn't necessarily put my finger on, and then started to all make sense together as I like collected more and more material.
Yeah. Here's a question for you. Which location felt more foreign? Richmond, Virginia, or Hamburg, Germany?
You know, this is a good question. I wonder because so much time has like passed. Like when I was in Richmond, I think like, I'm just thinking about this because even when I went to the South to go to Tennessee, I felt so far away to me from home, from New York. It was all like, felt so many new cultural associations that I wonder like if before the election I would have thought that or something. Like Richmond didn't feel, I remember Richmond feeling very familiar when I first got there, and then the election happened, and then I felt far, I was like, wait, did I misunderstand like everything about where I was or something? And so going to Hamburg just for a couple of weeks, I was like, oh, or not a week, just for a week. And like, okay, I don't literally understand what people are saying, but then obviously there's some things that felt really familiar to me too. So I guess that's just to say, like, going to Hamburg was my first time like really traveling anywhere since COVID. And now I realize that sometimes even going out on the street in New York, everything like felt really strange right after lockdown. And I'm just confused about
Yeah.
But you know, like say what one thing was like in New York, lots of people wear masks, right? In Hamburg, lots of people did too, but like in a lot of places in Tennessee, people did not. And so it made me think like, am I in the same version of reality or something, you know? So things like that felt almost more familiar in Hamburg than,
Yeah,
you know.
I think that's a fair question. I think with this whole situation we're in, we all feel these conflicting realities one way or another, whether it's IRL realities or sort of virtual online realities, whatever it might be. So we're going to open it up for some questions in just a moment. For those of you that are listening into the conversation, you're welcome, and we will invite you in. I have maybe one more question that I would like to ask. So let's, you know, we're kind of going the long way around, but let's come back to New York. Or I guess maybe better to say the East Coast or the Upper East Coast. You know, you're born and raised there, I assume. You got your education there, whether it's undergraduate level, whether it's graduate level. What were sort of your major influences in the arts? Were there certain artists, certain schools, certain institutions that kind of formed your worldview as an artist, or your view on the visual arts? What were the sources that kind of moved you and that still maybe sustain you today?
Yeah, what were some of the sources that moved me? I think that, well, I think like say when I was a student, sometimes a lot of my other my classmates and stuff really sort of pushed me in new directions or changed the way I thought about work. And in the case of grad school, it's like, I think artists that, so like now that we're making work at the same time. And I feel like now their voices are sort of, I get to see what they're up to all the time everywhere. So I learned so much about making video from working with Sandra Perry in grad school. We were at Columbia at the same time. And just like even like the technology of how to make the camera work, but also how to think about how cameras really like change the way that we see one another in social relationships. I feel like I learned so much from her. And an artist named Hector Garcia, who I was in school with as well, who's like very deeply devoted to craft and clay as a material. I've never like studied, there's a lot of clay work inside of this show, but I've never studied ceramics myself, but he would just kind of hang out with me with a beer, like at, at the weekends, and we would just kind of mess around with the material. And so learning from it in that way that felt very lateral and not top down was like really influential to me as a maker. I think also growing up in New York City, going on school trips, or just going with my grandma even to like the Brooklyn Museum and going into all those like period houses and stuff that they have there from the different moments in like American design and stuff, like, and being able to be like in a big giant dollhouse and imagine yourself surrounded by those things and the things that people had made. I think definitely comes up in my work still, that like imagined home and stuff, that like I think if I hadn't grown up in New York City, I would have had access to other resources, but I wouldn't have had access to that resource specifically.
Yeah, and then what else are you currently or planning to work on? What's sort of next for you? I know this exhibition is sort of a big moment, and there's a lot that went into it, and I'm sure you feel really excited, really relieved, really energized. So what's sort of the next moves that you're sort of plotting out, if you can give us any sneak previews?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm really excited to like kind of slow down a little bit, because like you said, it was a lot doing this show. And then also I did the survey in Tennessee at the same time. And so I was like kind of on this backlog of ideas, things that I had maybe even started before the pandemic, and making this new piece that I didn't quite get to show everyone for this show as well, like all at once, deadlines. And now I have a little bit more room to breathe. And so I'm really gonna slow down, I think. And so right now I'm trying to like look at a lot of stuff, just like look at things without trying to produce. I want to try to use there's a lot of resins and clays in my past sculptures, and that gotten really toxic for me. So I want to try to find less toxic materials to work in. And I'm also making videos for smart mirrors, which are those sort of like reflective mirrors that have like people do exercise, fitness things to them, and they'll be the instructor and you see yourself. So I've kind of designed one of my own. And so I'm trying to make videos that go specifically on these like kind of sculptural objects, and maybe the mirror is kind of like asking you what it should do just as much as it's telling you what to do.
Very cool. Sounds good. Okay, before I jump in with any more, because obviously we can keep talking, but I do want to give the audience a chance maybe to dive in with any questions or feedback. I don't know if Katya, our sort of benevolent moderator, is somewhere in the background monitoring to see if there's anyone that wants to jump in.
So far, no. Oh, yes, there is. There is a question. I just read it from the chat. Have you experienced different reactions to your work in the USA and in Germany? You recently opened an exhibition, Tasteful Interiors, in Chattanooga, and now the opening in Hamburg. Did the different audiences react differently, ask different questions, or gave different feedback?
Yeah, so I haven't gotten to meet my audience in Chattanooga yet. I'm going to go this week, but I basically, for there, I went and I installed, and then I left before the opening. So I didn't get to have that like conversation with people in real time with the work. Yeah, I thought like the questions in Hamburg were interesting. I think especially like dealing with things to do with Blackness. I did notice that people would tend to bring up questions that were more sort of globally oriented, whereas I feel like there's like a really specific, so say like talk about, I think a lot of people brought up like questions to do with like post-colonial issues happening all over the globe that affected Black people all over the globe. Whereas I feel like in the US, oftentimes like we're all like really specifically educated in like the American Civil War and the particular things that are happening here and what it means to be Black here, that my conversation is necessarily more specific, maybe because of the shared history of the people that I was talking to. But I would say that I just wish I could spend more time talking to people in Hamburg because I was there so briefly. That's the one sort of difference I noticed.
Thank you very much to you both. It was really great having you online, and hopefully someday again see you in real.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, hopefully so. Thank you both. Thank you everyone that listened. And yeah, just looking forward. Stay safe, everyone. Stay healthy.
Bye-bye.